Hello Mythic Europeans, it's Timothy Ferguson again. One of the commenters on the YouTube channel asked that I show you the books that were hiding in the corner of the study. There are so many books here that rather than doing all of them in one huge video, what I'm going to do instead is just do them in sections, so that if, for example, it's 12:30 at night and I've been exercising and I'm wearing boxer shorts and I don't want to appear on the video and I really have no idea what to talk about, we'll just be able to do a book recording and discuss the books. Sounds like a good plan to me. Anyway, we're looking across my top shelf at the moment. These are books by the Folio Society. Books by the Folio Society are very interesting to librarians. I'm a librarian. There's a fellow called Eli Neuberger who came out with a theory called Libraries Are Screwed, which suggested that in the future all books would be kind of like the folio editions of books, because books as a format would become like candles. Candles people don't use as a light source anymore, so they're no longer used for their primary function. What they're used for now is mostly ritual, romance, religion, those sorts of things, and he suggests books will go the same way. Sadly, books like these can't be lent out from a library. Well, they can, but most people wouldn't dare, because if they accidentally fall asleep and drop one in the bath, he says, in a vaguely autobiographical way, they wouldn't be able to pay the replacement cost of the books, and so they would never loan them. Anyhow, moving on, we'll discuss each of the books and what role they've had in the history of Ars Magica. Let's start with the big white volumes. There's one here, and another set over there at the far end, upside down and still wrapped in cling wrap. They're The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Haven't read them, have listened to the LibriVox edition. The LibriVox edition is brilliant. There are a lot of story seeds to be stolen from the books. Their history is bad, particularly concerning Constantinople, and it's really rubbery concerning the development of Islam, but still eminently readable. The first book in the white dust jacket, which looks seriously beaten around, is The Grand Tour, which is letters and diary entries by rich English people in the Victorian period who, at the end of their university education, were sent... What was it? The year before their university education? One or the other. Were sent on a kind of gap year, sent to Europe to have adventures, as they called it then, to get some culture, to get an older head on their young shoulders, and other vaguely disturbing terms. They called the people who ran the Grand Tour donkey leaders. We stole that wholesale for House Yarberton, or Jerberton. I often get the pronunciation wrong. Tell me what I should be calling them in the comments. It's Yarberton, isn't it? Anyway, the Yarbertons do that. They send their apprentices to... Well, it used to be Constantinople. Now it's off in Paris. It's wherever you need them to go, really. Next to them is The Wind in the Willows. I carried that book around for years. I think it's excellent. I have one of the older editions, which still has the Piper at the Gates of Dawn. If your version of The Wind in the Willows doesn't involve a meeting with the god Pan, you have a censored edition and should get a better one. William Hornwood wrote 3 sequels, which are also really excellent if you like the first one. The second one, Willows in Winter, is a little bit derivative, but it's still good, and I'd still recommend it to you. The brown volumes of Vasari's Lives of the Artists, I used 2 pages from that for House Yarberton. Vasari talks about how the first artists drew in charcoal on the walls of caves, and I stole some of that. But the rest of it is from later historical periods, Renaissance and after, so not particularly appropriate. Next to that are some Thomas Hardy novels, which were sent as a joining gift by the Folio Society. I've listened to Under the Greenwood Tree in the LibriVox edition. I haven't read the rest of them because I find them kind of depressing. So, yes, enough. Thank you, Thomas Hardy. Folk Tales of the British Isles. What you do is grab some ethnologists and you say, go out to the Celtic parts of the British Isles and talk to really old people and say, do you have some good folk tales? I stole one of them for the Marco the Liar fiction project. That's where I got turnips from, which turns up very early in the story. It's one of the shortest ghost stories in the world. It goes like this. 2 men are digging in a turnip field, and one turns to the other and says, I don't believe in ghosts. and the other, he vanishes. There we go, short story. The Greek myths. Take Greek myths, add Robert Graves, the guy who wrote I, Claudius and Claudius the God, and let him just make up weird pagan reconstructionist stuff that has absolutely no proof as his explanation of what's going on. Virtually useless as history. Some of it's useful in terms of designing mystery cults for Ars Magica, although I've never minded. The Newgate calendar, I remember reading it, I remember liking it, I remember very other few details. It's a court gazette from London in, he says, hopefully the Victorian period. Yeah, there you go. 1066 and all that. It's funny and it's European history, and I'm amazed we haven't done an Ars Magica edition. Ooh. Moving on, Diary of a Nobody, world's first blog. As a blogger, you have to salute Diary of a Nobody. It's the unpretentious adventures of an English gentleman who spends most of his life doing trivial things. Ghost Stories from the Folio Society. I've read most of them in other editions, but this one just kind of looked cool. And it gave me a few extras. I haven't really used it for Ars Magica. The Jubilee years I have flipped through. It was the Folio Society, when you rejoin each year, sends you a book out, and some of them are odd selections. The bestiary led to my first bit of serious Ars Magica writing when I tried to write a bestiary for a previous edition. It didn't go well. All the material has since been put online or published in one of the Ars Magica fanzines. It's a duplicate of the bestiary in the Bodleian Library. Excellent at the time, doesn't contain sufficient information to be of further use to Ars Magica readers who are familiar with the bestiaries we've done since. Then we have the strange sucking noise you're hearing is the cheap chair that I keep in my study. My study has two chairs, one which is comfortable with squeaks so I can't use for audio, and the other which doesn't squeak but makes terrible sucking noises when you're standing on it in bare feet. I didn't know that because I've never done that before. It's such a cheap chair that I'm not absolutely certain it'll last until the end of the video. If there's a sudden crash and you get some film of my ceiling, that's what's happened. History of the Crusades, which is the greeny, blue, bordery things directly in the centre of the screen at the moment. I intended to use, but I didn't really get picked up on those books. Sitting above them, Willows in Winter by William Hornwood, excellent book, and The Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper. I loved that book when I was a teenager. It's turned up in other people's role-playing writing. Whatever Rebecca Bogstrom called herself when she changed her name. Jenna. Can't remember. Noblesse. Turns up in Noblesse. The Light and Dark from Noblesse. Pretty heavily draw from this source, I'd say. If you've seen the movie, you have my sympathy. I've seen it too. Christopher Eccleston's good as the Dark Rider, but the movie's nowhere near as good as the book. Check out the book. I know some people criticise it as the famous Five take on the forces of evil, and I do get that, but, well, if you like, start with Book 2. Book 2 is fantastic. The Monks of War, some of that was used in Transylvania, because we had the Knights of the Sword colonising eastern Transylvania. Haven't used it for a lot of things. I feel like everyone else has got the whole Templars, Hospitaliers things covered. God, Graves and Scholars. I have two copies of this book. This one, which I paid an enormous amount of money for, and one which I got for 50 cents at a library book sale. I've never actually opened this version. The pages could be blank for all I know. It's a book about the early history of archaeology, particularly in, I want to say Greece, could be Egypt. Let's go with Greece. Could be wrong. Haven't used it in some time, and I'm mixing it up with some other things I've read since. The Pre-Raphaelites in their World, I didn't order. I think I got it as a sort of charity throw-in book because I'd rejoined for that year. I don't know what it's about. No, I do know what it's about. It's about artists who like to paint voluptuous red-headed women. I think. Let's move on. The Pastons. The Pastons were a medieval family, and they left enormous quantities of correspondence with each other lying around, and it's terribly intimate. You'd think that they expected their correspondence to be destroyed. For example, one of the Pastons' women asks her husband, who's away on business, to buy her a new belt, and that's her way of signalling him that their long-desired child is on the way, because her old belt no longer fits. Just a wonderful history of middle-class families in the Middle Ages. And as I say, that's just an excerpt of the bits that can be fitted together into a coherent narrative. The actual original Paston letters just go on for tens of thousands of pages, as I recall. I've only tried reading them once. I can't even get LibriVox to do them because there are just too many, and LibriVox are insane. I mean, they did decline and fall, and you've seen how big that is just in this video. The next one, Jane Austen Shorter Works. I've only read one Jane Austen shorter work, which was a pamphlet that Linda and I bought at Jane Austen's house in Bath. Haven't read that book, haven't read any Jane Austen books cover to cover. I know librarians across the country are going to send me abusive mail, but there you go, bad luck, Jane. I'm in Australia, and she's the most popular author in Australia, poll after poll. She beats J.K. Rowling, she beats God, Jane Austen. Yeah. Must get around to it eventually. If you haven't watched the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, give them a go. They're brilliant. Sanditon, the source material lets it down a little. Moving on. The Rise and Fall of the House of Medici was really useful in terms of the bibliography at the back. It let me... It gave me the books I needed to read to be able to write my sections of City and Guild. Not so much in terms of the Medicis, because they're a little bit late for what we were doing, but the research that the author had done, which we could then follow up and dissect for our own purposes, was excellent. The Best of the Raconteurs. I didn't even know this book was here. This is the second time I've recorded this video. I had to re-record it because most of the time the camera was just pointing at the shelf along here because I am hopeless at this. And I discovered that book occluded by two other books. And yeah, so I have a witty, funny book of late Victorian comedies. Well, that's something to look forward to on the weekend. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. I've read the first one, haven't read the second one. Linda's recorded some of them for LibriVox, I recall. Something I should go back to. The Goodman of Paris. Weird, creepy, misogynistic book, which is also a cookbook. It's written by a man, the Goodman of Paris, who has married a girl who is far younger than he is. He knows he's going to die a lot before she does, and presumes that since she's going to be rich, because she's going to have all his cash, she's going to be quite a catch. She'll be young, she'll be rich, she's going to marry someone else, and this is the instruction manual for being a good husband for that man. So, yeah, little bit strange. The Thin Red Book is the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which is a book of poetry. Folio Society used to force you to buy 4 books a year, and when I was broke and in college, buying thin books was the way to get that done. The Constellations of Philosophy I should read. I've flipped through it, particularly when I was doing my philosophy courses back in uni, but it turned up in one of Mikhail D. can't pronounce his last name's books, where Bonasaja sent a copy of it to Grierman. Nelson and Emma, haven't read. Should wait a minute. No, I have read it. Yes, it was good. If you're into naval fiction, and the lives of English adventuresses. Fun book. Medieval Women. I don't know where that book came from. When I was doing the video last time, I said to myself, I think that's one of Linda's, but in hindsight, no, it isn't. I must have bought it at a second-hand sale at some point and then completely forgotten it existed. Sounds like a useful thing for Ars Magica. We'll see how that goes. Oh, I know now. I tracked it down because I was trying desperately to find a way of shoving extra women into Lords of Men. So yes, that's what that's for. Cautionary Tales by Hilaire, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Belloc, is a book of humorous rhymes about children being eaten by things. Good for writing fairies. Next to that is Dracula. Linda and I bought that at the British Library, so we would have the first book that was ever bought for our daughter. Well, we didn't know she was a daughter. We were still in the planning stages at that point. Be purchased at the British Library. And we wanted a book that was meaningful to our family and its values, and so we bought Dracula. Moving on. At the Court of the Borgias, I want to say that's by Procopius, but of course it's not by Procopius, it's just by someone who's very similar in that he takes a lot of money from the Borgias to do various other things, and writes a vitriolic memoir which doesn't get published until after his death. A lot of fun, a lot of useful plot hooks if you're playing nobles, and moving on, Best of Dorothy Parker. She was a witty New York writer in the, want to say 1920s. Not particularly useful for Ars Magica, but there you go. Our Village by Mary Russell Mitford. Oh my goodness, this is a useful book. Not so much for what's in it, but because she's the first person who goes, my village isn't particularly important, but I'm going to introduce you to everyone here and you're going to love them. And so I sort of see her as the ancestress of Stars Hollow and Lake Wobegon and many, many covenants, which we will get into in a later week. But yes, Mary Russell Mitford, Our Village, very useful book in terms of thinking about the structure of telling stories about communities. The next book is The Black Death. Use that a little bit for the demons in Antagonists. Is it still called Antagonists? Sometimes they change names between when we're writing them and when we publish them. I know I could check the Ars Magica books, which are on my shelf slightly to my left, but it's the middle of the night and I'm really lazy. I think The Black Death's pretty much been played out for Ars Magica. Maybe someone will find something new to do with it. I can't think of anything. The last time I used it, I kind of stole the Silver Plague from Clark Ashton Smith and said that it only affected magi. Yeah, I'm sure someone will find something interesting to do with it, but I kind of think it's monolithic and therefore slightly boring, in the same way that I find the Mongols fantastically uninteresting as subjects about which to write. I know a lot of people disagree about that. They like catastrophes, and, you know, more luck to you if you do. I personally don't find them very interesting. I used to play Total War Medieval 2 a lot, and the thing I hated was that regardless of what you did, the Mongols would always invade, and so it was always Mongols, 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 Mongols. I think the Black Death is a bit like that, and the Mongols are a bit like that in terms of Ars Magica campaigns. If you're anywhere in Eastern Europe, someone is going to make you deal with the whole Mongol thing, and it just seems a little bit boring for me, which is why in Against the Dark, House Tremare is strong enough that they might, theoretically, in certain worlds, send the Mongols home again, letting you get on with other things. So that's the top shelf. We have other shelves, which we'll get to in other videos. Next week, I said I was going to be talking about castles. Oh, actually, I've snookered myself there. I'm going to have to put this one up before next week's video, aren't I? So, yeah, next week I'm going to be talking about castles. It'll be the start of a new series, which I'm calling the Propaganda series. And the idea of the propaganda, I should have checked the pronunciation, will be that they're videos to show people you'd like to convince to play Ars Magica, who are not interested in Ars Magica now, and who you don't want to try and sell the game on the traditional pitch, which is where we talk about the magic system, and we talk about the houses, and so, oh, and that's me running into the wall. We talk about the houses, and so it's all Creo, Rego, Corpus, Herbum, Yarberton, Creaman. I'd like to keep it jargon-free. And so it's going to be a set of jargon-free videos about why Ars Magica as a setting is excellent. And let's just pan in on our patroness for the next week. Our Village by Mary Russell Mitford, because I'll be comparing Coaris, the place where the Tremare hang out, with Stars Hollow from the Gilmore Girls. And I'll see you next week.